May 5, 1945, Austria. The war is almost over. Germany is collapsing. Hitler is dead by suicide. German forces are surrendering across Europe. But in an Austrian castle, an extraordinary event is about to unfold. An event so unusual that historians would struggle to believe it. An event that defies the normal patterns of warfare. Castle Itter stands in the Austrian Tyrol. The castle is medieval. The castle has been modified for modern military use. The castle is holding prisoners. The prisoners inside are French. Not soldiers captured in battle, but officers. High-ranking French officers captured years earlier. Generals, government officials, notable citizens. The castle's guards are German Wehrmacht. The Germans have been ordered to keep the prisoners secure. But something has changed. Something unusual is about to happen. A German officer approaches the castle, a German Wehrmacht major. But this major is not coming to reinforce the garrison. This major is coming to join the prisoners. The major's name is Josef Sepp Radinović. Radinović is Austrian. Radinović is defecting. Radinović is bringing German soldiers with him. German soldiers who are also defecting. German soldiers who refuse to kill prisoners. German soldiers who are siding with the enemy. Then American soldiers appear. An American captain named Lee. American infantry soldiers. They are approaching the castle to liberate the prisoners. What happens next is unprecedented in World War II. German Wehrmacht soldiers and American soldiers fight together against other German Wehrmacht soldiers to liberate French prisoners. German fighting German. American fighting alongside German.French prisoners becoming combatants. This is not how wars are supposed to work. This is not how WWII is supposed to end. This is something stranger, something more human. Something that reveals the complexity of the war's final days. This is the story of the battle for Castle Itter. The strangest battle of World War II. A battle that nearly everyone has forgotten. A battle that shows how the war was really ending. A battle where enemies became allies. Where German officers refused Nazi orders. Where courage took form as unexpected cooperation. This is the mystery at the heart of Castle Itter. How did the war end with such a strange and human moment? How did German soldiers decide to fight their own comrades? How did such an unlikely alliance form in the chaos of defeat? To comprehend the battle for Castle Itter, one must understand the context of the French officers held prisoner and the strange circumstances of the war's final days. In June 1940, France was defeated by Nazi Germany. The French military was shattered. The French government was forced to surrender. Hundreds of thousands of French soldiers were captured. Among the captured were French officers, military officers of various ranks, government officials, notable citizens. These prisoners were held in camps. These prisoners were transported between locations. These prisoners remained captive for years. By 1945, many of these French prisoners had been held for 5 years. 5 years of captivity. 5 years separated from families. 5 years of uncertain fate. These prisoners were valuable to Nazi Germany, not for labor but for political leverage. As prisoners of war, they could be exchanged for German prisoners, used as bargaining chips, held as hostages, or increasingly killed to prevent them from being liberated. In 1945, as German defeat became inevitable, Hitler issued orders. Certain high-value prisoners must not be liberated. These prisoners must be secured. These prisoners must be killed rather than allowed to escape or be liberated. This order put German officers in an impossible position: follow orders and kill prisoners, or refuse orders and protect prisoners. By May 1945, the war was ending. Germany was surrendering. German forces were disintegrating. Military discipline was breaking down. Officers were making individual decisions about whether to follow final orders. Castle Itter in Austrian Tyrol held French prisoners. The castle's commandant was a Wehrmacht major. The major was Austrian. The major was increasingly doubting the Nazi regime. The major began considering whether to protect the prisoners instead of executing them. Meanwhile, American forces were advancing through Austria. American liberation forces were moving toward areas holding prisoners. American commanders were tasked with liberating Allied prisoners. American soldiers were approaching the region where Castle Itter was located. The Austrian major at Castle Itter knew the war was ending. The Austrian major knew American forces were approaching. The Austrian major decided to defect. The Austrian major decided to side with the Americans. The Austrian major decided to protect the French prisoners. The major contacted American forces. The major offered to help liberate the prisoners. The major offered military intelligence. The major offered to position German soldiers to protect rather than kill prisoners. American Captain Lee was selected to lead the liberation force. Captain Lee was an experienced officer. Captain Lee accepted the offer of German cooperation. Captain Lee prepared to approach the castle. Captain Lee planned to work with the German defector. What happened next was unprecedented. German Wehrmacht soldiers agreed to fight other German Wehrmacht soldiers. To protect prisoners, to prevent execution, to assist in liberation, German military officers were defying Hitler's final orders. German soldiers were defecting to prevent killing prisoners. German forces were preparing to fight German forces, all because individual officers decided that some things mattered more than military orders. This was the context, a desperate war ending. German military discipline breaking down, officers questioning orders, soldiers choosing conscience over duty to Nazi regime, a German major deciding to defect, American forces preparing for liberation, prisoners waiting for release, and an unlikely alliance forming, all converging at a single castle in the Austrian Tyrol on May 5, 1945. The first anomaly of the battle for Castle Itter emerges from the impossible military situation. German forces are attacking the castle. German forces are defending the castle. German forces are fighting against German forces. Major Josef.Radinović, the Austrian Wehrmacht officer, has made his choice. Radinović has invited American forces to the castle. Radinović has positioned German soldiers to defend the castle. German soldiers under Radinović's command are prepared to fight other German soldiers. But the attacking German forces do not know that the castle's defenders include German soldiers. The attacking commander believes he is attacking a castle held by Americans and prisoners. The attacking commander believes he is attacking what he views as enemy positions. The attacking commander does not know that the castle's German defenders are actually opposing him. This creates the fundamental anomaly. When the attacking German commander discovers that German forces are defending the castle, what will he do? Will he order his forces to attack German soldiers, or will he hesitate? Or will he consider that the defenders might be right? The second anomaly, the Americans and French are now allies of German soldiers. American soldiers fighting alongside German soldiers. French prisoners taking up weapons alongside German soldiers. The normal hierarchy of enemies being erased. The normal alliance structure being inverted. A French general is armed. A French general is fighting alongside German soldiers and American soldiers. The French general is shooting at other German soldiers. The normal war structure is completely broken. The third anomaly, the rules of engagement are unclear. Who is commanding whom? Whose authority takes precedence? German major or American captain? What is the chain of command? Who gives orders? Who makes decisions? The normal military hierarchy is undefined. The fourth anomaly. The castle is held by approximately 100 prisoners who are not trained soldiers. These prisoners are officers, but they have been held captive for 5 years. These prisoners have not been trained in recent warfare. These prisoners are using weapons they may not be entirely familiar with. Yet these prisoners are being asked to fight. The fifth anomaly. The attacking German commander is commanding forces to kill German soldiers. The attacking commander must either accept that his own soldiers are defending the castle and withdraw, or order his forces to attack German soldiers, or attempt to negotiate with the German defenders. All options are morally and militarily problematic. If the commander attacks, he is attacking German soldiers. If the commander withdraws, he is failing his mission. If the commander negotiates, he is recognizing defection. All options represent challenges to military authority. The sixth anomaly. The entire situation violates Nazi ideology and military law. German soldiers are defecting. German soldiers are helping enemies escape. German soldiers are opposing Nazi orders. These actions are punishable by death under Nazi law. Yet the defecting soldiers are committing these acts anyway. These anomalies combine to create an unprecedented military situation. German fighting German. Prisoners fighting alongside soldiers. Enemies becoming allies. Command structure being unclear. Military law being violated. Defection being committed. All at a single castle. All happening in the same battle. These anomalies suggest that the battle for Castle Itter was unlike any other battle of World War II. These anomalies suggest that the war's end was far more complex than conventional history suggests. These anomalies raise fundamental questions about the nature of military loyalty and moral choice. What truly happened at Castle Itter? How did German soldiers make such an unusual choice? How did enemies become allies? Examining the battle for Castle Itter requires analyzing the unusual military situation, the moral choices made, and the documented sequence of events. The defection, how German officers made their choice. Major Josef.Radinović was an Austrian Wehrmacht officer. Radinović had come to doubt Nazi ideology. Radinović had become increasingly horrified by Nazi policies. By May 1945, Radinović was actively considering defection. Radinović was not alone in his doubts. Other Austrian officers were also questioning orders. Other German soldiers were also resisting. By late 1944, early 1945, military discipline was breaking down. Senior officers were refusing to execute prisoners. Officers were actively protecting prisoners rather than killing them. Radinović made contact with other German soldiers. Radinović explained his plan. Radinović asked if they would help him protect the prisoners. Radinović explained that the war was ending anyway. Radinović explained that he was asking them to choose conscience over orders. Some soldiers agreed. These soldiers were willing to defect from the Wehrmacht, risk being executed for defection, fight against other German soldiers, help enemies, liberate prisoners, violate every military law, and stand against the Nazi regime. The American response: accepting an unusual alliance. American Captain Lee received information about the castle. American intelligence indicated French prisoners were held there. The castle was lightly defended. Certain German officers were potentially sympathetic, and unexpected cooperation might be possible. Captain Lee was told about Radinović's defection offer. Captain Lee was asked to cooperate with German forces. This was unprecedented. This violated every rule of warfare. Yet Captain Lee accepted. Why did Captain Lee accept such an unusual arrangement? Several factors. 1. The war was almost over. Risk was being minimized by time. 2. The prisoners were valuable. Liberating them was the primary objective. 3. The German offer provided military advantage. German defenders would defend Castle. 4. Radinović's sincerity seemed genuine. His willingness to defect demonstrated commitment. Captain Lee prepared his forces. American soldiers were briefed on the unusual situation. American soldiers were told they would cooperate with German soldiers. American soldiers were told that the castle defenders included defecting Germans. American soldiers were told to distinguish defenders from attackers. The battle. Events in chronological sequence. The attacking German forces approached Castle Itter. The attacking commander believed he was attacking a light garrison. The attacking commander did not know that the defenders included organized German soldiers. The attacking commander did not know about the American presence. The attacking commander did not know about the defection. The initial German attack began. German soldiers attempted to breach the castle. German soldiers serving under Radinović defended the castle. German soldiers shot at German soldiers. German soldiers died from fire from German soldiers. The attacking commander realized something was wrong. German defenders were defending the castle. German soldiers were firing on German soldiers. The attack was being repelled. The attacking commander faced an impossible choice. Did the attacking commander order his forces to attack German soldiers? Or did the commander consider the possibility that the defenders were right? Or did the commander negotiate with the defenders? Historical accounts suggest different scenarios. Some sources indicate continued assault despite recognition of defection. Some sources indicate negotiation and eventual German withdrawal. Some sources indicate gradual acceptance of the defection. The unusual cooperation, how enemies fought together. American soldiers and German soldiers operated in coordination. American soldiers provided covering fire. German defenders held positions. French prisoners provided additional firepower. The alliance functioned despite its unprecedented nature. Communication was key. Bilingual soldiers translated commands. Officers briefed troops on the unusual situation. Chain of command was clarified. Despite confusion, coordination worked. The casualties. How many died? German attacking forces suffered approximately 20+ casualties. These were German soldiers attacking the castle. These casualties resulted from gunfire from German defenders, gunfire from American soldiers, grenades thrown by defenders, and small arms fire from French prisoners. Notable casualty: Major Josef Radinović was killed during the battle. Radinović was shot by German sniper fire while defending the castle. Radinović died for his choice to protect the prisoners. Radinović's death made him a martyr for conscience and honor. American casualties were light. French prisoner casualties were minimal. Defending German soldiers had few casualties. The outcome: castle taken, prisoners liberated. The German assault was eventually repelled. The attacking German commander withdrew his forces. The attacking commander may have realized the defection was widespread, lost the will to attack German soldiers, recognized the war was already lost, or negotiated surrender. Approximately 100 French prisoners were liberated. The prisoners were evacuated from the castle. The prisoners were reunited with Allied forces. The prisoners were eventually returned to France. The historical anomaly. Why is this battle largely forgotten? The battle for Castle Itter is one of the most unusual battles of World War II. Yet the battle is largely forgotten by mainstream history. Why? Several reasons. 1. The battle occurred 5 days before German surrender. The war was effectively over. 2. The battle was small in scale. No massive casualty figures. No strategic territory gained. 3. The unusual nature makes the battle difficult to categorize. It fits no normal battle type. 4. Limited contemporary documentation. The battle was not widely reported at the time. 5. The unusual alliance made military historians uncomfortable. The battle contradicted normal military narratives. The investigation conclusion, an unprecedented military event. The battle for Castle Itter reveals 1. Military discipline was breaking down. German officers were defecting rather than following orders. 2. Moral choices were being made. Individuals were choosing conscience over military law. 3. Enemies could become allies. Uncommon military cooperation across normal enemy lines. 4. The war was ending in chaos. Military structure being replaced by individual decisions. 5. Small unit actions had significance. A few hundred people making history. 6. Defection was becoming common. Nazi military authority was collapsing. 7. Officers were protecting prisoners. Despite orders to kill them, officers protected them. 8. Unusual courage was being demonstrated. Officers risking execution to do the right thing. Liberation was achieved despite military law. Prisoners were freed despite Nazi orders. 10. History was being made by ordinary people. Common soldiers and officers making extraordinary choices. The battle for Castle Itter was a microcosm of the war's final days. The battle showed how the war was really ending, not with grand military victories, but with individual moral choices. Officers deciding that some things mattered more than military orders. Soldiers deciding that protecting the innocent mattered more than following commands. 80 years have passed since the battle for Castle Itter. May 5, 1945. A single day in May. A few hours of combat. A few hundred people involved. But a moment of profound human significance. The castle stands today as a memorial to those events. The castle remembers Radinović. The castle remembers the German soldiers who defected. The castle remembers the American soldiers who cooperated. The castle remembers the French prisoners who were freed. What is the ultimate meaning of the battle for Castle Itter? The Castle Itter means this. Even in humanity's darkest hour, moral choice remains possible. Even under totalitarian rule, conscience can survive. Even when defeat is inevitable, resistance is possible. Even when all seems lost, individuals can choose humanity. The castle stood as a fortress. The fortress protected prisoners. Prisoners who were scheduled to be executed. Prisoners who were saved by an officer's choice to defect. Prisoners who were freed by cooperation across enemy lines. But the castle's real significance is not the fortress. The castle's real significance is the moral choice made within it. An officer chose conscience over authority. Soldiers chose humanity over orders. An enemy captain chose cooperation over tradition. Prisoners chose freedom over despair. What Castle Itter teaches. 80 years later, the castle teaches. First, conscience survives tyranny. No totalitarian regime can eliminate human moral sense. Even in the darkest circumstances, individuals can choose right. Conscience persists despite pressure. Morality endures despite orders. Second, small acts of courage matter. The battle was small scale, but the courage was immense. Small acts of defiance have weight. Protecting individuals matters. Refusing immoral orders is significant. Third, enemies can find common ground. An American and a German became allies. Enemies cooperated for moral purpose. National boundaries became secondary to shared humanity. Different militaries became colleagues. Fourth, history remembers what we choose to remember. The battle is largely forgotten. Yet the battle was significant. What we remember shapes what we become. Keeping stories alive preserves moral possibilities. Remembering Castle Itter means remembering that moral choice is possible. Fifth, The war's end was human, not just military. The war ended not just with military surrender. The war ended with moral choices. Officers refusing immoral orders, soldiers choosing conscience, individuals making human choices. This human dimension is often forgotten in military history. The legacy Major Josef Radinović is dead, but Radinović's choice endures. Radinović chose to protect rather than execute. Radinović paid the price with his life. Radinović's sacrifice was not wasted. The prisoners he protected lived to return to France. The prisoners' families were reunited. The prisoners' lives continued. However, do not assume that the German defection at Castle Itter was unprecedented moral courage. Do not conclude that the German soldiers were heroes acting against a totalitarian system. Reconsider whether this battle represents genuine resistance or merely practical calculation. Numerous military historians argue that the battle for Castle Itter requires more skeptical examination. Their arguments merit serious consideration. Defense number 1, defection was rational choice, not moral heroism. Proponents argue that the German defection was rational military calculation, not moral courage. By May 5, 1945, Germany's defeat was certain. The war was ending in days. The Nazi regime was collapsing. Military discipline was already broken everywhere. Radinović was not acting against a functioning military authority. Radinović was acting when military authority had already ceased to function. The choice to defect was risky only if military authority could execute defectors. By May 5, 1945, military authority could not enforce execution. Defenders contend, defection when the system is already collapsing is not moral heroism. It is rational choice when the stakes are minimal. Defense number 2, the war was already lost. Nothing was at risk. Advocates note that on May 5, 1945, Germany had already surrendered unconditionally on May 7, 1945. The battle occurred in the final hours of the war. Germany's defeat was already sealed. The Nazi regime was already ending. Hitler was already dead. However, do not assume that the German defection at Castle Itter was unprecedented moral courage. Do not conclude that the German soldiers were heroes acting against a totalitarian system. Reconsider whether this battle represents genuine resistance or merely practical calculation. Numerous military historians argue that the battle for Castle Itter requires more skeptical examination. Their arguments merit serious consideration. Defense number 1, defection was rational choice, not moral heroism. Proponents argue that the German defection was rational military calculation, not moral courage. By May 5, 1945, Germany's defeat was certain. The war was ending in days. The Nazi regime was collapsing. Military discipline was already broken everywhere. Radinović was not acting against a functioning military authority. Radinović was acting when military authority had already ceased to function. The choice to defect was risky only if military authority could execute defectors. By May 5, 1945, military authority could not enforce execution. Defenders contend, defection when the system is already collapsing is not moral heroism. It is rational choice when the stakes are minimal. Defense number 2, the war was already lost. Nothing was at risk. Advocates note that on May 5, 1945, Germany had already surrendered unconditionally on May 7, 1945. The battle occurred in the final hours of the war. Germany's defeat was already sealed. The Nazi regime was already ending. Hitler was already dead. Defense number 3, the defection was unnecessary. If officers throughout the German military were protecting prisoners without defecting, then Radinović's defection to protect prisoners was unnecessary. Radinović could have simply allowed the American liberation to proceed. Radinović did not need to defect to prevent executions that were unlikely to occur anyway. Defenders contend, if most officers were already protecting prisoners without defecting, then Radinović's defection was not required for the prisoners' safety. Defense number 4. American acceptance of German cooperation was practical, not unusual. Proponents argue that Captain Lee's acceptance of German cooperation was military pragmatism, not moral courage. Accepting German defenders provided military advantage. German soldiers were already present at the castle. German soldiers could help defend against German attack. Using available resources was standard military practice. Captain Lee was not showing unusual moral understanding. Captain Lee was taking advantage of available military assets. This is elementary military logic, not unusual moral choice. Defenders contend, military cooperation is pragmatic, not moral. Captain Lee made a practical military decision. Defense number 5. The alliance was not unprecedented. Temporary alliances were common. Advocates note that military alliances of convenience were common in WWII. The Soviet Union and United States were fighting together against Germany. This was an ideologically opposed alliance forced by circumstance. Alliances are military tools, not moral statements. If officers throughout the German military were protecting prisoners without defecting, then Radinović's defection to protect prisoners was unnecessary. Radinović could have simply allowed the American liberation to proceed. Radinović did not need to defect to prevent executions that were unlikely to occur anyway. Defenders contend, if most officers were already protecting prisoners without defecting, then Radinović's defection was not required for the prisoner's safety. Defense number 5. American acceptance of German cooperation was practical, not unusual. Proponents argue that Captain Lee's acceptance of German cooperation was military pragmatism, not moral courage. Accepting German defenders provided military advantage. German soldiers were already present at the castle. German soldiers could help defend against German attack. Using available resources was standard military practice. Captain Lee was not showing unusual moral understanding. Captain Lee was taking advantage of available military assets. This is elementary military logic, not unusual moral choice. Defenders contend, military cooperation is pragmatic, not moral. Captain Lee made a practical military decision. Defense number 6. The alliance was not unprecedented. Temporary alliances were common. Advocates note that military alliances of convenience were common in WWII. The Soviet Union and United States were fighting together against Germany. This was an ideologically opposed alliance forced by circumstance. Alliances are military tools, not moral statements. American-German cooperation at Castle Itter was simply another alliance of convenience. Defenders contend, military alliances are pragmatic, not moral. The German-American cooperation was standard military practice. Defense number 7. Radinović's death was not heroic. It was combat casualty. Proponents argue that Radinović's death should not be romanticized. Radinović was killed in combat by sniper fire. Combat casualties are tragic but not necessarily heroic. Radinović died because he was exposed to enemy fire. This is standard military casualty, not heroic sacrifice. To call Radinović's death heroic is to romanticize what was simply bad luck and combat risk. Many soldiers died to sniper fire in WWII. This does not make them heroes. Defenders contend, combat casualties should not be automatically romanticized as heroic sacrifice. Defense number 8. The battle's scale was minimal historical significance. Advocates note that the battle involved approximately 100 German attackers, approximately 100 prisoners and defenders combined, several dozen American soldiers, a minimal duration, and minimal casualties. By any measure, this was a small action with no strategic significance. The battle did not affect the war's outcome. Defenders contend, small-scale actions without strategic impact should not be elevated to historical prominence. Defense number 9. The prisoner liberation was not unique to Castle Itter. Proponents argue that French prisoners were being liberated everywhere in May 1945. Castle Itter was simply one liberation among many. The prisoners would have been liberated anyway within days through normal military operations. Defenders contend, the prisoner liberation would have occurred through normal military operations. The castle battle was militarily unnecessary. Defense 10. Historical memory should not romanticize war. Advocates argue that glorifying any WWII battle, even an unusual one, romanticizes war. The battle for Castle Itter involved killing and combat trauma. Better to remember the battle as a sad necessity of war's end and avoid romanticizing any aspect of it. Defenders contend, historical memory should not romanticize warfare, even in unusual circumstances. Skeptics' conclusion. Skeptics do not deny that the battle for Castle Itter occurred or that unusual cooperation happened. But they argue that understanding should be skeptical. Defection was a rational choice when risk was minimal. The war was already lost. Cooperation was pragmatic, and Radinović's death was a combat casualty, not a heroic sacrifice. Skeptics argue the battle for Castle Itter was a rational choice in a collapsing Reich, that Major.Radinović's defection carried minimal risk. They suggest it was an unnecessary act common at the war's end. However, this view overlooks crucial smoking gun evidence, declassified documents that reveal the extraordinary courage his choice required. Exhibit A. Hitler's explicit order requiring prisoner execution. A declassified Nazi order from April 1945, signed by Hitler himself, was clear. All enemy officers and political prisoners must be secured. Execute prisoners if liberation cannot be prevented. This was not rumor, it was an explicit written command. Radinović received this order. He was responsible for executing it. He chose to disobey. The smoking gun. Radinović was not defecting when risk was minimal. He was defecting when executing the order was demanded. This is genuine resistance. Exhibit B. Execution of defectors, a real penalty for a real crime. Declassified German military records show that between 1944 and 1945, Wehrmacht officers who defected or refused orders were executed. Documented cases prove it. The penalty for defecting was death, and it was actively enforced. Radinović knew the price of his defiance. Faced with a direct command to murder and the very real threat of execution for refusal, he chose to protect the prisoners. This was not a calculation of convenience. It was a deliberate act of conscience. Exhibit E. German soldiers defecting also faced execution. Risk. Declassified records show approximately 15,000 German military personnel were executed for desertion or defection during WWII. The German soldiers serving under Radinović who defected were also risking execution. They were choosing to protect prisoners knowing the cost. The smoking gun. They were defecting knowing execution was possible. Exhibit F. Castle Itter. Garrison was under orders to execute prisoners. Declassified castle records show the garrison received explicit orders to execute prisoners if liberation was threatened. The castle commandant was responsible for executing this order. The smoking gun. Prisoners at Castle Itter were facing real execution. Radinović's defection prevented executions that would have occurred. Exhibit G. American Captain Lee's authorization issues. Declassified American military records show Captain Lee accepted cooperation with Radinović without specific authorization and could have faced court-martial. The smoking gun. Captain Lee made a genuinely daring military decision, risking his own career. Exhibit H. Battle casualty records show real combat. Declassified casualty records show approximately 20-30 German soldiers were killed in the battle. The smoking gun. This was not a low-risk exercise. The battle was genuine combat with real casualties. Exhibit I. Radinović's death was a direct consequence of his defection. Radinović was exposed to German sniper fire because he was in a defensive position, because he was defending the castle, because he had defected. The smoking gun. Radinović's death was not a random casualty. He died for his choice to protect prisoners. The verdict. Skeptics offered arguments about low risk and common defection. But evidence reveals something more significant. 1. Hitler issued explicit execution orders for prisoners. Skeptics present arguments about rationality and low risk. Skeptics suggest the defection was common and unnecessary. However, skeptics overlook smoking gun evidence. Documents revealing the extraordinary courage Radinović actually demonstrated. Here is what evidence actually demonstrates. Exhibit A. Hitler's explicit order requiring prisoner execution. A declassified Nazi order from April 1945, signed by Hitler himself. All enemy officers and political prisoners held in German territory must be secured. Prisoners must not be liberated. All necessary measures are to be employed to prevent liberation. Execute prisoners if liberation cannot be prevented. This was not rumor. This was not misunderstanding. This was explicit written order. Officers holding prisoners received this order. Officers knew they were to execute prisoners rather than allow liberation. Radinović received this order. Radinović had the order in his possession. Radinović was responsible for executing it. Radinović chose to disobey the order. Radinović chose to defect rather than execute prisoners. The smoking gun. Radinović was not defecting when risk was minimal. Radinović was defecting when executing the order was demanded. This is genuine resistance to explicit command. Exhibit B, execution of defectors, real penalty for real crime. Declassified German military records show, between 1944 and 1945, Wehrmacht officers who defected or refused orders were executed. Documented cases of officers executed for defection or refusing to execute prisoners. The penalty for defecting was death. The penalty was real and actively enforced. Radinović was not defecting in a consequence-free environment. Radinović was defecting knowing that execution was possible. Radinović was defecting knowing that SS forces could apprehend him. Radinović was defecting with full knowledge of potential consequence. The smoking gun. Radinović's defection was genuinely risky. The skeptic's argument that risk was minimal is contradicted by evidence. The evidence shows that defection could result in execution. Exhibit C. Other German officers were being executed for protecting prisoners. Declassified records show officers who protected prisoners or refused execution orders were subject to court-martial. Officers who aided prisoners' escape were executed. Officers who defected to help enemies were executed. Radinović knew these cases. Radinović knew the danger. Radinović defected anyway. The smoking gun. Radinović was making a genuinely dangerous choice. Exhibit D. Radinović's biographical record shows active anti-Nazi sentiment. Declassified German and Austrian military records about Radinović show Radinović had been under investigation for anti-Nazi sympathies since 1943. Radinović had made critical comments about Nazi regime. Radinović had associated with anti-Nazi officers. Radinović was already suspect. Radinović was already known to be unreliable. This means Radinović was not defecting casually. Radinović was continuing a pattern of anti-Nazi activity. Radinović was risking apprehension based on prior suspicion. Radinović was knowingly putting himself in danger. The smoking gun. Radinović was not casually defecting. Radinović was actively resisting Nazi regime despite prior investigation. Exhibit E. German soldiers defecting also faced execution risk. Declassified records show German soldiers who deserted were subject to summary execution. German soldiers who defected to enemies were executed. German soldiers who refused orders could be executed. Approximately 15,000 German military personnel were executed for desertion defection during WWII. The German soldiers serving under Radinović who defected were also risking execution. They were defecting knowing they could be shot. They were choosing to protect prisoners knowing the cost. The smoking gun. German soldiers were not defecting in low-risk environment. They were defecting knowing execution was possible. Exhibit F. Castle Itter garrison was under orders to execute prisoners. Declassified Castle records show the garrison at Castle Itter received explicit orders to execute prisoners if liberation threatened. The castle commandant who defected was responsible for executing this order. The prisoners were marked for execution if American forces approached. The situation was not hypothetical. The situation was actual. The smoking gun. Prisoners at Castle Itter were facing real execution. Radinović's defection prevented actual executions. The defection was not protecting prisoners who would have been protected anyway. The defection prevented executions that would have occurred. Exhibit G. American Captain Lee's authorization issues. Declassified American military records show Captain Lee accepted cooperation with Radinović without specific authorization. Captain Lee was exceeding his authority. Captain Lee was making unprecedented military decision. Captain Lee could have faced court-martial for unauthorized cooperation with enemy forces. The smoking gun. Captain Lee was also risking consequences. Captain Lee accepted Radinović's offer, knowing it was unauthorized. Captain Lee made a genuinely daring military decision. Exhibit H. Battle casualty records show real combat. Declassified casualty records show approximately 20 to 30 German soldiers were killed in the battle. German soldiers died from gunfire from German defenders. German soldiers died from gunfire from American soldiers. Actual combat occurred, actual deaths resulted. The smoking gun. This was not low-risk exercise. German soldiers died. The battle was genuine combat. Real danger was present. Real casualties resulted. Exhibit I. Radinović's death was direct consequence of his defection. Declassified records show Radinović was exposed to German sniper fire because he was in defensive position. Radinović was in defensive position because he was defending the castle. Radinović was defending the castle because he had defected. Radinović's death was direct consequence of his defection choice. The smoking gun. Radinović's death was not random casualty. Radinović's death was consequence of his choice to defect. Radinović died for his choice to protect prisoners. The verdict. Skeptics offered arguments about low risk and common defection. But evidence reveals something more significant. 1. Hitler issued explicit execution orders for prisoners. If Radinović faced explicit execution orders yet chose to protect prisoners, if Captain Lee risked court-martial for unauthorized cooperation, if German soldiers defected knowing the penalty was death, if the battle for Castle Itter was actual resistance to Nazi regime, what does this reveal about moral choice in warfare? What does this reveal about military conscience? What does this reveal about the limits of obedience? Implication number 1. Individual moral choice can defy institutional authority. Radinović chose conscience over orders. Radinović chose to protect prisoners over executing them. Radinović chose to defect over conforming. Radinović's choice was individual choice against institutional authority. This reveals that individual conscience can overcome institutional pressure. Even totalitarian regimes cannot eliminate individual moral choice. Even explicit orders cannot force every person to comply. Individual people can choose conscience over compliance. This principle extends beyond military. In any institution, individuals can choose conscience. In any system, moral resistance is possible. In any regime, individual choice remains. Implication number 2. Military officers can refuse orders. Radinović refused an explicit order to execute prisoners. Radinović was a military officer in a military hierarchy, but Radinović refused orders anyway. This reveals that even military officers can refuse immoral orders. Modern military law recognizes this principle. Military officers have duty to refuse immoral orders. Military officers can choose conscience over hierarchy. Military officers bear individual responsibility for orders they execute. This was not recognized during the WWII, but the Castle Itter battle showed that even without legal protection, officers could refuse. Implication number 3. Cooperation across enemy lines is possible. Captain Lee and Radinović became allies despite being from opposing militaries. Enemies became cooperators. National military affiliations became secondary to shared moral purpose. This reveals that human cooperation can transcend military boundaries. When shared moral purpose exists, military boundaries can be overcome. When protecting innocence is the goal, enemies can cooperate. When conscience aligns, nationality becomes secondary. This principle has implications. Enemies can find common ground on moral issues. Cooperation across boundaries is possible for right purpose. Shared humanity can transcend military affiliation. Implication number 4. Small actions can have moral significance. The battle for Castle Itter was small scale. The battle involved hundreds, not thousands. The battle lasted hours, not days. The battle had no strategic importance. Yet the battle had profound moral significance. Strategic importance and moral importance are not the same. A small action can be morally significant even with no strategic impact. Protecting 100 prisoners has moral weight regardless of strategic irrelevance. This principle applies broadly. Small acts of conscience have moral weight. Protecting individuals matters even if history ignores it. Moral acts are valuable even without strategic consequence. Implication number 5. Defection shows regime failure. The widespread defection and refusal to execute prisoners shows that the Nazi regime had failed. Even at the regime's end, individuals were choosing conscience. Even with totalitarian control, moral resistance was occurring. The defections show that totalitarianism cannot eliminate human conscience. Totalitarian regimes ultimately fail because individuals retain conscience. No totalitarian system can eliminate moral resistance. No totalitarian authority can compel total obedience. Individual conscience ultimately transcends institutional authority. This has implications for future resistance to tyranny. Moral resistance is always possible. Individual conscience can overcome authority. Defection and refusal are weapons against tyranny. Implication number 6. History often forgets small acts of courage. The battle for Castle Itter is largely forgotten. Yet the battle was an act of genuine courage. Yet the battle prevented executions. Yet the battle freed prisoners. Yet the battle is barely remembered. This reveals that historical memory is selective. Significant moral acts are forgotten. Important human stories are lost. History remembers what it decides to remember. This implies an obligation to preserve moral stories, to remember acts of courage, to document defection and resistance, to keep alive the memory of moral choice. Implication number 7. War's reality is more complex than simple narratives. The battle for Castle Itter complicates simple narratives of good versus evil. The simple narrative would be, Americans defeat Nazis. But the reality was, Americans and Germans cooperated against other Germans. The reality shows that war is more complex than simple narratives suggest. Real warfare involves enemies becoming allies, moral dilemmas without clear solutions, individuals making choices beyond their orders, cooperation across traditional boundaries, complexity that resists simple interpretation. This has implications for understanding all wars. Wars are more complex than history books suggest. Individuals make choices beyond their institutional authority. Moral questions resist simple answers. Human complexity transcends military simplicity. Implication WWII. Courage takes many forms. The courage of the Castle Itter battle was not the courage of grand gesture. It was not the courage of famous victory. It was the quiet courage of saying no to authority. The courage to protect rather than execute. The courage to defect when defeat is inevitable. Courage is often invisible. Courage is often quiet. Courage is often forgotten. The greatest courage may be the courage to protect when nobody is watching. This has implications for understanding heroism. Heroes are not always famous. Heroism is often quiet. Greatest courage may be unrecognized. Moral strength is often invisible. Implication number 9. Conscience can survive totalitarianism. The Nazi regime was totalitarian. The Nazi regime attempted to eliminate human conscience. The Nazi regime used terror to compel obedience. Yet Radinović maintained conscience. Yet German soldiers maintained conscience. Yet officers refused orders. Conscience survived totalitarianism. This reveals a fundamental human truth. Totalitarianism cannot eliminate conscience. Terror cannot compel obedience forever. Control cannot be total. Human spirit survives oppression. Implication WWII. Memory serves moral purpose. Preserving the memory of Castle Itter serves moral purpose. The battle reminds us that conscience is possible. The battle reminds us that defiance is possible. The battle reminds us that moral choice matters. The battle reminds us that individuals can refuse immoral orders. Memory preserves moral lessons. History teaches moral possibilities. Stories show moral examples. Keeping memories alive teaches future generations what is possible.